and welcome in to be our guest. Folks, we've got a real treat for you today because everybody in our audience knows about Hyundai. And today we have with us Scott Posey, and you are General Affairs and Events and PR and
I'm part of a large team. I'm actually the manager of the public relations team. So
yes.
There are 9 other very talented gurus and mavens that have expertise in communication, in graphics design, in community relations, and event planning, and photography and videography. So I'm just lucky to be able to lead the team, but they're the ones that are the real talent.
And my nickname for him is Mr. Modest. And we've been talking about this, and you were teaching me some fascinating things about the Korean culture and how Hyundai came to be, and because they're such a tremendous part of our community and all for the good, not just economically, but the things that they do that make a difference in people's lives. And the culture is fascinating. Tell our audience something about them.
It is fascinating, and I kind of am a bit self-learned on this because I've worked with, I've been in the communication realm for 35 plus years, mostly in Alabama. And I've worked for multicultural organizations. I've worked for Germans before with a steel mill in North Mobile that was called ThyssenKrupp.
Right.
I worked with Japanese who later were one of the joint partners that purchased that mill. So I've worked with a number of different cultures, but I'd never worked with North Koreans before. So I just took it upon myself to ask lots of questions, to read books, and to learn as much as I could, because to understand someone, you really kind of need to know, and to know what motivates them and why they are who they are, you kind of need to know their past. And what I discovered for me was very, very fascinating, and that the story of Hyundai, the motor company as we know it today, and the story of South Korea, there are a lot of parallels, and it's really kind of the same story. South Korea is often referred to as the impossible country. I've seen that phrase related to South Korea in a lot of the books that I've read. And if you think about where South Korea was, or Korea was at the end of World War II.
Right.
And already a poor country, and like many countries during the war that were either involved militarily or were occupied, as Korea was, after the war they were devastated. And they didn't have a lot of resources before the war, so it was in pretty bad shape at the end of World War II. So the founder of Hyundai, a gentleman by the name of Ju Young Chung, made his way, grew up in a peasant family, a large peasant family, owned nothing. Made a couple attempts to leave home, the family kept bringing him back. On one of his 3rd or 4th attempts, he actually made it, and he made his way down into what is now South Korea around Seoul. Tried many different things, opened a rice store at one time. This was during the occupation by the Japanese of Korea, so they shut it down. He wasn't successful at that. And then when the war ended in 1947, he founded a construction and engineering firm, and he decided to name it Hyundai. And Hyundai is roughly translated in Korean meaning modern. But it started as a construction and engineering firm, and he had no formal education. I mean, very few people at this point in Korea that had any education. And so he worked, before he founded it, he worked kind of helping helping in other construction projects. And the new government needed to build lots of roads, needed to build lots of bridges. They needed to rebuild things they'd lost, and they needed things that they'd never had to begin with. And so he had great success at that. He would build his projects on time. He would often build them under budget. And as he got more and more successful at that, he got more and more projects until finally they were getting into the billions of dollars worth of major roadway projects, bridge projects. At one point, South Korea had no shipping industry, so they needed someone to build ships, and he, I think, kind of raised his hand and said, "Oh, I can build a ship." Never built a ship, never studied shipbuilding, and but started building ships, and today South Korea is the largest shipbuilder in the world. In 1967, Ford wanted to build an automotive plant in South Korea, So they went to the man who had this reputation for success in building things and asked him if he would build an automotive plant. So they had a Ford engineered and designed car called the Cortina. And in 1967, he formed Hyundai Motor Company. So from construction to vehicles in
Wow.
1967. Cortina was successful. I think among all of Ford's plants worldwide, that plant in in a city called Ulsan, which is near Seoul, was one of the most efficiently run plants. And then one day, I think our founder of Hyundai just said, well, why can't we build a South Korean vehicle? Why does it have to be Ford? Why can't we build a South Korean design engineered vehicle? So in 1976, he did, and the very first car, Hyundai vehicle, rolled off the line in South Korea called the Pony. You probably, it was called the Pony. Probably haven't heard of it. It was sold mostly in Korea and in Europe, was very successful in Canada. There were some emission standards that were recently passed in the United States, so he couldn't sell it in the US. But when those changed, that car, the predecessor of that car, was introduced in the US called the Excel, and you probably do remember the Excel.
Yes.
That was in 1987.
Wow.
So it was popular. It sold 180,000 units the first year. Unfortunately, 2 years later, it was only selling about half that many because the Excel was an incredibly affordable vehicle. And it had great gas mileage, 30 miles per gallon, which was big in '87.
That's great. This is a good place for us to stop, and what we're going to do, this is so fascinating. We're going to come back next week and finish this segment on the Korean culture and how Hyundai got started. And all of you are going to join us, and this will be fascinating. And thank you so much for being with us.